You Are the Healer is sponsored by BetterHelp. Therapy is mandatory because there's absolutely nothing wrong with seeking help. I think every person who walks this earth needs therapy, honestly. I'm stoked to be connected with BetterHelp to offer affordable and accessible therapy resources. The link is in my show notes, and you can also go to betterhelp.com/healer. That's better, HELP.com/healer. Now let's get into this episode. Welcome back to You Are the Healer. I'm your host, Rinderknecht, where I use my experience in my career as a psych nurse, as well as a human being with her own mental health, to help you learn how to be your own healer. So we are in the season of spice right now, and things have been spicy. Things have been heated. And so this episode is going to be even more of that. We are going to learn how to have brave conversations without burning bridges. We're going to be balancing the heat and the heart. And it's a true art form, and I truly believe that especially right now, this message is so needed for so many people. Before we get into it, I really, from the bottom of my heart, just want to say thank you to everyone that's a supporter of You Are the Healer, everyone that listens. If you follow me, you're subscribed, you're engaged, you let me know how much you love the episodes, that just lights my soul on fire. And the intention of this podcast for me is really just to spread the healing message. So in whatever way you do that, whether it's telling your friends, posting it on your story, sharing it, subscribing, whatever you do to spread this message, you have no idea how many people it could help. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me live my dream. Now, in this episode, we're going to be learning how to navigate hard conversations with people who are different than you. And why does this matter? Why do you care to learn about hard conversations when it's easier just to avoid them? So it's needless to say that we are in a divided world right now, that there's a lot of disagreements to be had, and those disagreements can feel so unbearable, so uncomfortable, and a lot of times we just avoid them. And in that case, then our dividedness grows even further. So this episode matters because if you care about growing closer to people, if you don't want our world to be incredibly divided, having hard conversations is how we mend, it's how we heal. And a lot of times when we have intense convos, we think there are two options. We can either explode and start yelling at each other and be more on the disrespectful side, or we can completely avoid it because it makes us uncomfortable, so we don't even want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And then it's years and years of resentment built up. And again, that divide gets even greater the more that we avoid hard conversations. And I want to encourage you in this episode that there is a powerful middle path. You don't have to explode. You don't have to avoid. There is a middle path towards connecting with other people, even when it feels like we have so many differences. This episode is both about holding the heat of truth telling. So that is the spice, that intensity where it can be uncomfortable, because being honest and speaking your truth can be very difficult sometimes. So we are balancing holding the heat and holding the heart for connection, because real intimacy happens through honest, real, brave conversations. So this episode is for the listener who's wondering, how the heck am I going to survive my family Thanksgiving this year? This is for someone who's wondering, can I love someone that I fundamentally disagree with? This episode is for you if you think, can I be heard without raising my voice? And can I challenge my thinking without losing myself? So in this episode, we're going to talk about why differences feel so dangerous to our nervous system. We're also going to talk about what makes a conversation brave. We're going to talk about how to stay regulated when you're in the heat of an intense conversation. We'll touch on when to stay and when to walk away, which is very important when it comes to our differences. We'll talk about holding both heat and love and what that looks like. And we'll end with some affirmations to hopefully increase your trust and love in other people. All right, so we're going to start with, why do differences feel so dangerous? And I really want to touch on this before we get into it, because I think understanding the science of our brains is so fascinating. And when we understand why it can be so dysregulating to us, then I think we're more able to give ourselves grace and other people grace if they get incredibly dysregulated when they're in disagreement with other people. And when we talk about disagreements, this could be literally anything, okay? And so I want to start with a metaphor that it might sound silly and superficial, but I think it'll really help you understand navigating differences and still being able to connect with human beings despite those differences. So the metaphor we're going with is sports teams. Yep, Sydney Rinderknecht is talking about sports on her own podcast. Who would have thought? If you know me in my personal life, I literally don't care about sports. I'm like, I brought a book to the Super Bowl this year, okay? I just stopped caring. But I think this metaphor will really go a long way because it kind of takes the seriousness out of it. I think with everything, specifically in our political environment right now, our differences can feel so threatening to our well-being. But when we think about it as a metaphor of we're just rooting for different sports teams, it takes that edge off the intensity of the disagreement. Okay, so when it comes to rooting for a team, you most likely root for the team that your family was already a fan of before you were born. Like, I became a Steelers fan because my mom was a Steelers fan. That's kind of how that happened. And usually the team that you root for has to do with where you were born in the world, right? So my mom was raised in Pittsburgh, became a Steelers fan. Even though we weren't in Pittsburgh, where my family's roots were determined what team I rooted for. And don't get me wrong, people get really heated about sports. I think of like my uncle was at a hockey game and he saw someone punch a grandma in the face. Okay, right? People get so heated thinking about all of their differences when it's literally like your only difference is where you were born and what team your family rooted for. That's why you're so passionate about the sports team. Like, if you were born in anyone else's life, you would root for the same team that they're rooting for now. Do you understand that? Like, it's so silly if you think about it. If you were born in someone else's life and you lived all of their experiences, you would have the same beliefs that they have right now. Even if you think, there's no way I could think like that, there's no way I'd believe something like that, you would. That's why they believe it, because all of their experiences have led them to that belief. And when we think of our beliefs, it is very closely tied to our identity. Everything in our life has shaped this belief. Every experience we've had, every lesson we've got from family members, from friends, our lived experiences formulates beliefs and values in our lives. And those things are very deeply personal to us. And these differences can feel so dangerous because our beliefs and values are personal to us. And when they're different from other people's, we feel so separate from them. We feel like we are operating differently. When in reality, we are all human beings. We're all the same species. But when our beliefs are different, when our values are different, we can feel fundamentally very different. And that feels like a threat to our safety. And there's a lot of perceived morality when it comes to our beliefs. Like, I'm a good person because I value respect so much. So that way, when you're looking at people whose beliefs differ and their values differ from yours, you have perceived morality as in almost, I'm better than you because I value these things more than you do. And that's a very harmful way of thinking, but we automatically do that as humans. We have so many automatic thoughts without our conscious awareness that we are sorting people into categories and boxes based on our first impression of them. And so because having people who disagree with you, who have differences than you feels like a threat to our safety, we choose to surround ourselves with people who agree with us. We choose to surround ourselves with people who are very similar to us because otherwise it's really uncomfortable. If you are around people that are incredibly different than you, you're forced to look at yourself. You're forced to challenge your way of thinking because you're surrounded by other ways of thinking. You're surrounded by different values, different alignments. So naturally, because being around differences makes us uncomfortable, we are going to surround ourselves with people who are very similar to us. And what that means is we have an incredible amount of confirmation bias when it comes to our own beliefs and values. Because we are in our environment, we are only surrounded by people who think like us, who look like us, who believe the same things, who usually vote the same way, who root for the same sports team, things like that. And a lot of times people don't want to affiliate with people who are different than them because it's a threat to their identity. And threats to your identity are very, very uncomfortable. It's a threat to your sense of self if you are around people that challenge your identity, if you are around people that challenge your way of thinking. And so the natural human instinct is to be around people that are similar, which I'm not saying is inherently a bad thing because it's great to have a tribe of people who you feel so aligned with and like you're really connected. And at the same time, if you are not around anyone that thinks differently than you, then you're not going to have a lot of tolerance for difference. And that's what I want to talk about today is how can we tolerate people for their differences? And it's really hard in today's political climate. That's like the example that keeps coming to mind is like, how do we tolerate someone who has different political beliefs than us? And I just want to remind you that if you lived in someone else's shoes, every experience that they have, you would have the same political beliefs as them too. And so take out the moral hierarchy of it, take out the judgment of other people, let that part of your brain just sit to the side, because right now we are talking about how can we come together even with our differences. Because right now it is so important to choose to come together, because the more divided we are, the more we are able to be controlled by people in power. Being divided is the ultimate threat when it comes to our humanity. Again, we are so similar to each other, and if we are constantly fighting each other, then we're not going to be paying attention to the bigger things at play, and that is the true threat. If we don't surround ourselves by people who think differently than us, then it is going to be so much harder to have tolerance and empathy for anyone that thinks or believes differently than us. We need to be in conversation with people, especially people that think and feel and behave differently than us, because the more that we avoid conversations with those that are different than us, the more divided we're going to be. The less we're going to be able to understand their way of thinking, and the easier it is to be us versus them, which again is very dangerous thinking. And again, we are all humans and we have so much more in common than we have different. So what makes a conversation brave? Again, I just think of the urge to completely avoid a hard conversation. I definitely have that urge. Hard conversations require vulnerability. Vulnerability is letting somebody see who you really are, opening yourself up to potentially be hurt. So it's a vulnerability over defense in a hard conversation. It's also curiosity. Leading with curiosity is so powerful. Curiosity over wanting to control somebody else. And boundaries, oh my gosh, boundaries are so relevant to this conversation. We will get into it, but it's boundaries over bitterness and resentment. Brave conversations are less about winning and needing to be right and more about understanding and witnessing. So when I think of brave conversations, I really think about going to therapy with my mom. Shout out Liam. Love you, girl. Up until I was in therapy with my mom, it was a constant battle of I'm right, no, I'm right, you're wrong, it's my way or the highway. It was very toxic and no one was feeling heard. We were constantly yelling at each other. And in therapy, we realized the goal wasn't who was right or who was more valid. It was, I want you to understand my experience. I want you to understand how I feel. I want you to witness me. And what happened when we went from needing to be right to just wanting to witness each other's experience is we realized we had so much in common, like a ridiculous amount. And I know I've been saying this, but we have so much more in common than we have different with each other. And having hard conversations can prove to you that, oh my gosh, we do care about the same things. Oh my gosh, we are actually way more similar than I thought. Brave conversations can lead to the joy of finding that unexpected common ground, that relief of, oh my gosh, you're not so different than me. You're really not a threat to my identity. We're actually more the same than different. And that's so cool, and that's so powerful, and it's such a good feeling. So that's why it's important to have these brave, hard conversations. So the next part of this episode, we're going to talk about how to stay regulated in the heat. When you are having a hard conversation, how can you ground yourself? What techniques can you use so that way you don't explode in anger or want to run out of the room and avoid? So the goal of hard conversations is to be in that middle path. We're not rageful. We're not completely avoiding. We are in the middle path, which I truly believe starts with curiosity. When you just get curious about someone's experience, can you tell me why you think that way? What led you to make that conclusion? Why do you care so deeply about this? That takes people's defense off and lets them be vulnerable. And again, vulnerability is the key to having these hard conversations. What we're going to do is we're going to take the middle path of curiosity. And before you have the convo, again, like I talked about in the last episode, you got to regulate beforehand, okay? So whatever you need to do to prepare yourself for this conversation. I find that journaling before a hard conversation is really helpful. Meditating, venting to somebody else, whatever you need to do before the conversation starts. So you're starting off on the best foot forward. And establishing boundaries before you have the conversation. This is so important. It's helpful before any hard conversation to have a quick check-in before you get into the heat of the argument or the conversation. And that could look like making some agreements beforehand. Like, can we agree no matter what that we'll respect each other? Can we agree that if we raise our voices that we'll both take a break? If I start to get overwhelmed, I need 5 minutes to regulate. Things like that. So that way, when you're in the thick of an argument, it's not like, don't walk away from me. It's like, we already talked about this. So it's not something that's going to escalate things further. Having safe communication rituals. This is really important. So having a timeout, having a word that you use when you have to pause and stop, that is so helpful. A lot of times we use that in the hospital with kids and their families because things can get so heated. They're like, broccoli, and then they have to just stop and pause for like a couple minutes to regulate. And so establishing those things before you get into the thick of a hard conversation. Me and my twin sister did this. We've actually never even needed to use it since establishing it, but when we would have really hard conversations, if we would go like this, I'm just raising an X out of my arms, then the conversation would have to stop. It's getting too heated. That's a sign that we can each use to each other to communicate, okay, we need to take a break. And having these things are really important because having hard conversations in itself can feel really unsafe and dysregulating. Establishing safety in any way you can beforehand is incredibly helpful. Also, knowing your signs of when you need to take a break. And this is going to look different for everybody, right? This is cues that tell yourself, okay, I'm escalating. I'm getting to a point where I can't have a good conversation anymore. And so at work, we talk about our emotional thermometer. So a 0 out of 0 is I have none of that emotion. And an 8 out of 8 is, oh my gosh, that's the most intense that emotion will ever be in my life. And so we ask the kids, what number on your emotional thermometer do you have to be in order to have a hard conversation? In order to manage conflict, 0 to 8, what level do you have to be at? And I'm sitting at like a 1 or 2 because I need to be really regulated before having a hard conversation, especially if it's with like a romantic partner or a family member, because those can be so intense for me. Knowing yourself and knowing, okay, what level of emotional intensity can I handle a conversation at? And what are signs that I'm too elevated to continue this conversation? So for me, that looks like getting physically really hot and like my face will turn red and I will be so warm that I'm like, okay, I'm clearly dysregulated. I need to take a step back. That could look like clenching your jaws or clenching your muscles and being super tense, because when we're angry, all that energy wants to go somewhere. And if we don't regulate it, it's going to go at that other person. We're likely going to hurt them or disrespect them or do something that we regret. So knowing the signs of when you need to take a break. Other things could look like raising your voice, yelling at somebody. For me, it really looks like a sense of urgency. If I feel like I have to get my point across incredibly fast or else I won't be heard, then I know that I'm a little too emotionally elevated to be at a space for a conversation. Because usually with anything, if we slow down just for a second, we are able to savor more of that moment. Okay, so if I slow down and I regulate and take a break, then I'm more likely able to communicate with someone else effectively. But I know that if I'm like rambling, like I need to get this point across like right now, then I'm too escalated to truly be having a meaningful conversation. And it's time to pause and slow down so that we can get more out of this opportunity. So I encourage you to reflect on what are the signs that you have that show that you need to take a break when you're feeling a little emotionally elevated. The next way to stay regulated when you're in the heat of an intense conversation is your breath. And we're not reinventing the wheel here, honey. It really works. Whether that's taking deep breaths throughout the conversation, whether that's pausing from talking and just breathing, and even breathing at the same time as the other person, like, let's just take a deep breath right now. It never hurts. I promise you it never hurts. And that could be grounding yourself in your breath beforehand, intentionally deep breathing afterwards. Incredibly regulating skill. I know you've likely heard it many times before, but again, people say it for a reason. Grounding in your breath is incredibly regulating and can absolutely help you manage a hard conversation. The next tip I have is get in your body. So ground yourself through your senses. That could look like a million different things, right? That could be fidgeting with something in your hands and focusing on that sensation. That could be feeling your feet on the ground and bringing yourself back to that when you find yourself escalating and wanting to be reactive. That could look like using your senses. So maybe saying, what are 5 things I see right now? Do I smell anything in the room? Am I tasting something? Just really grounding through your senses and staying in your body, especially because when we start to get elevated in an intense conversation, we're going to have more energy, we're going to have more emotions, and our body's going to want to do something. So that could look like after a hard conversation, going and exercising, going on a run, going on a walk, dancing, shaking it out, because we're likely going to have a lot of energy that we need to dispel after having an intense conversation. Anything that you need to do to stay present and not overwhelmed, I encourage you to do that. So we've talked about how to stay regulated in the intensity of a hard conversation, and now is the time we're going to talk about when to stay and when to step away. And this is very important when it comes to navigating differences in other people, because you don't have to have a close relationship with everybody. If someone's beliefs and how they approach you are harming you, it is okay to walk away. And so the question is when is the line, right? When do I stay and when is it too much and it's time to walk away? And so I want you to ask yourself, is this misunderstanding or is this harm? If it's harming you, your boundaries matter more than this bond with this person. If someone is intentionally harming you, you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to end the relationship. So I just want you to ask yourself, is this misunderstanding or is this harm? And it's the optimist in me that really wants to believe that most of the time it is misunderstanding, and it is our skewed perspectives of the world, especially when we don't surround ourselves by people that are different than us, that we can't understand people's perspective, and it leads to a lot of misunderstanding, which can lead to a lot of hurt. That doesn't mean that someone is intentionally harming you. Now, there are absolutely instances, let's say you got this one aunt at Thanksgiving who is so mean about your identity and what you look like and all of these things, and it's harmful to you at this point. It's not a misunderstanding. It feels like it's a direct attack. You can walk away from that relationship. Even if it's family, even if it's someone you've had a relation with for so many years, your health and safety and well-being matter more than this bond between this person. There are so many people in this world. Not everyone can be for you. Not everyone gets to be close to you and gets your energy. That's okay. So again, I think the true line in the sand for me is if it's harmful to you, if maintaining this relationship or the way that this person treats you is harmful to you, then it's okay to walk away. But again, we are all completely different. So you might have a different line in the sand. This is just my perspective of when I would choose to walk away. And walking away or ending a relationship does not have to be an act of cruelty. Most of the times it is an act of self-respect and self-love. You are allowed to choose where you put your energy. You can be picky with who you get close to. If it's not in alignment, that is okay. There is no need to force a relationship. Again, there are so many people in this world, and I truly believe that the people that you choose to surround yourself with greatly influence you. And so if you don't want to be influenced in a direction by somebody, if you don't want to be more like that person, it's okay to not spend a bunch of time with them. Stepping away can look like ending that conversation. Stepping away can look like ending the relationship, or it can look like all of the shades in between. It can look like just not being super close to that person anymore, or knowing that you're not going to tell them very vulnerable things about you because there's potential for harm there. Now we're going to be talking about holding heat and heart at the same time, the nuance of life, the true balance and art of maintaining relationships when we feel really different from each other. And I want to start by saying, thinking that a person or groups of people are just one way, if you think of like cognitive distortions, if it's black or white, if it's all or nothing, thinking that anyone or any group of people are one way is a huge disservice to their humanity. Humans, I like to think of the analogy, humans are disco balls. There are so many tiny aspects of ourselves that reflect light in different ways. And if we are saying that this entire group of people is this way, or this person is just this, we are greatly disservicing their humanity and the nature of the complex nuance of being a human being. So if you find yourself thinking this way, if you think a certain group of people is X, a certain group of people is Y, this person is only ever this, I really want that to be a alarm in your head to challenge yourself. Is that true? You can ask yourself the little detective question of, can that be 100% true? Do I know with complete certainty that that is a fact? It's likely not. But again, our human brains just want to categorize things. They want to put people into groups and in boxes so that we can conceptualize our world. That is how our brain works. It's trying to make sense of our surroundings. And a lot of times it judges people into very simple categories when we are not just one thing at all. We're a multitude of things, and that's what makes humans so beautiful. And again, that's what makes us so similar, is we have so many different aspects to who we are. Yeah, you might be disagreeing on this one aspect, but if you're an entire disco ball and it's just one tiny little mirror piece that's different, you're still both disco balls, and you're still very similar, and you are fundamentally the same. You understand what I'm saying? So I want you to drop the belief that people are just one thing, because we're not. That's not how humans work. Another way to hold both heat and heart at the same time is know that you can love someone and not like their beliefs. And you can empathize with someone, and that doesn't mean that you agree with someone. You are able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, okay, I can see why they would make that decision. I still don't agree with it. I still would not make that decision for myself right now, but I can understand where they come from. And it's okay to empathize and not agree, but you're still seeing the humanity in the other person, and you're leading with curiosity of, how did you get there? Versus, I'm just going to judge you and avoid it and not even get curious as to how you got there. So a little story I have about holding heat and heart is, I work with someone who voted differently than me. And I've known for a couple months before the election that she was thinking that way. And it was a little bit challenging to work with this person and to be around them and think, like, how could you think that way? Like, it just truly, for me, I wasn't surrounding myself with people that thought differently, that voted differently, that are in any different political parties. If anything, everybody in my life, for the most part, completely agrees with the way I think. So being in close proximity to someone who thought completely different than me, I was shocked. I was like, how is that even possible? Like, I enjoy working with you. You're a nice woman, and I couldn't understand how someone that I enjoyed being around could vote in a way that I fundamentally disagreed with, right? And again, this is a true testament to humans are not just one way, because I remember so clearly after the election happened, things were tense in the hospital because I'm going to try not to make this too long of a tangent, but right after the election, we had so many kids that were queer, LGBTQ+, that were admitted to the hospital because they tried to kill themselves because of the current administration, because they were so scared, because they truly felt so unsafe in who they are. And it was just a really hard time in general because, there was no coincidence in the amount of our patients. Like, we usually have a lot of queer patients, but this was like almost all of them were LGBTQ+. And it was just so heartbreaking because it's like, these are children. And they just deserve so much better. They just deserve to live in a world where they feel accepted and safe for who they are, because it's who they are, man. And I remember I was working with this coworker around this time when a bunch of queer kids were in the hospital. We just switched presidents. It was doom and gloom. Vibes were low everywhere. And there was another kid on the unit who was bullying other kids and making racist comments towards them. And this nurse, who voted differently than me, she said, "Has anyone else heard this patient making these racist statements? It's really not okay, and I'm more than happy to address it if no one else has addressed it already." And I just remember thinking, how is that even possible? How can you want to stand up to racism and vote the way that you did? How can you be compassionate and vote the way that you did? I just remember being completely mind boggled, because I'm like, this isn't making sense in my brain, because I thought that everybody that voted that way was so one way. And here someone is right in front of me, being a great nurse, being an advocate, being compassionate, not tolerating racism. And I'm just like, this makes no sense to me. But again, I share this story because humans are so dynamic and so complex, and we are not just one thing. And so if you look at one aspect of someone and you judge them for that, you're missing the entire picture, and you're missing out on true connection and intimacy and our shared humanity, which is such a sweet, beautiful, like joyful thing to realize. You know what it's like to be like me. You know what it's like to have these experiences. I'm not alone in this. And if we are writing people off for one thing, whether it's their sports team or who they voted for, we are missing the boat of connection. And that is devastating to me. You can stand in your truth and your values and your belief and still see someone else's humanity. You can protect your peace without becoming passive. And I just want you to know that people are allowed to disagree with you. If everybody thought the exact same way, our world would not be what it is. Our world is what it is because we are all different, because we think differently, our brains work differently, and that is something to be celebrated. And with that comes tolerance. Tolerating people that are different than you, tolerating any of our differences is so important, because we're not going to stop being different. We are so complex as humans, and it's so important to lead with curiosity and to understand where people are coming from and really tolerate each other. And tolerate's like the bare minimum. Like, we should be celebrating each other for our differences. We can be supporting each other through our differences. We can bear witness to someone being different than us. And something that I really want to highlight here is it's okay to be mad at the system, but I don't want you to focus on the symptom. And what I mean by that, I learned from the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibrahim Kendi. So good. Fire. That book. And it talks about, while it's, let's use racism as an example. While it's easy to be mad at somebody for being racist, they are a symptom of a system that is teaching racism, right? So we live in a racist society. I'm not arguing that one. And so we have racist policies, we have racist institutions, we have racist systems that trickle down and affect people to where people are a symptom, and their behavior is a symptom of a system that is teaching them how to be that way. And so I encourage you to speak up for things that are wrong, unjust, hurtful, hateful. That is incredibly important. And know that no one was born this way. This is learned behavior. Whether it's racism, homophobia, whatever it is, this is something that was taught to us as humans. We weren't born being this way. And I think also I had this one patient one time who he was a young boy. He was a young kid, and he was saying incredibly racist things. I mean, it was like, whoa, dude, where'd you hear that? Like, what's your home life like, kind of thing. And it really just showed me that while I could get mad at this child for saying such heinous things that he said, I'm like, this is learned behavior. He learned this from other people. He learned this from his environment. And it's so clear when it's children, because they don't know any better. When they come into the world, they're this clean slate. And then we absorb our systems and our learned hierarchical beliefs and our culture, and that becomes how we behave and how we speak and our values and things like that. And so while it's easy to look at one other person and say, you're the problem, there's a system that leads people towards hate. And I just want to leave you with that. It's easy to be mad at an individual, but what we're really looking at here is a greater system failure. And so I want you to redirect when you're feeling really angry or irritable or hopeless about individual humans. I want you to direct that towards the system that made them that way, because that's really all it is. We are all humans. We all start off as a clean slate, and all of our experiences and where we were born and the families we were born into and the friends that we had, they shaped us into who we are now. And that's why tolerance is so important, is because, again, like I said, if you were born in anyone else's shoes, you would think and behave exactly as they do right now. And so it's so important to tolerate each other for how we are different and to come together and to be able to bridge those differences and realize we are way more similar than we are different. And now, as we're wrapping up this episode, I want you to reflect on something. I'm going to put this in the show notes so that way you can journal about it. I want you to ask yourself, what's the hardest conversation you've been avoiding? I don't even want to think about my own answer. I'm like, nope, 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 nope. What's the hardest conversation you've been avoiding? And what would it sound like to speak with love in that conversation? Just going to leave that there. So I encourage you to reflect on that, journal on it. Again, I'll put it in the show notes. And now we're going to wrap this episode up with some affirmations that I think will really be helpful when it comes to navigating differences with other people. So repeat after me. I'll say a phrase, an affirmation. I'll give some space so that way you can say it to yourself, either in your head or out loud. And you can always come back to this episode and scroll to the end to repeat these affirmations. Okay. So we're going to take a big deep breath in to start. And exhale, feel your feet on the ground or wherever they are. Ground yourself in your body and really stay present in this moment and know that the amount of effort that you put into these affirmations is what you'll get out of it. So repeat after me. I believe people are good and trustworthy. I accept people for who they are. I am able to have hard conversations. I am allowed to speak my truth without guilt or fear. I accept the differences in others and still choose to love them. Every hard conversation is an opportunity for deeper connection. It's okay if I see the world differently than others. Okay, thanks for affirming. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for listening to this episode this far. Wherever you're listening, go ahead and comment an orange emoji. Any emoji that's orange, just so I know that you're listening, that you're engaged. If you listen on Spotify, there's always a comment section there. If you're listening on YouTube, I really encourage you to subscribe. I need 1,000 subscribers to make any coin on YouTube, which is kind of a lot. So go ahead and subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. We'll spread the healing message. Like the video. Leave a rating or review. And if you're really feeling it, I work as a transformative nurse coach. So I got my certification where I help people one-on-one tackle their mental health, learn how to have these hard conversations, learn how to set boundaries, to overcome people pleasing, and to truly thrive and live their best life. So if you've always been curious about coaching work, I literally can't even explain how transformative it's been in my own life. Go ahead and book a free discovery call with me. It's 30 minutes. There's no strings attached. I would love to simply connect with you and talk about some things that are on your heart. All those links are in the show notes. You can also go to my website, www.youarethehealer.com, and that's where all of my podcast episodes are. I have a blog. I have testimonials from my coaching services. So if you're curious about it, go ahead and check out youarethehealer.com. And until next time, I send you so much love. I wish you so much bravery as you navigate hard conversations, and I hope that you are well.